for us. And so I wanted to begin. Now we're all members now. Once you become students at the university, you are a member of the academy. But to be an academic is a little different. You become an academic when you choose to be a lifelong student. And that's what I think by doing a Ph.D. or deciding to do a Ph.D., that's what you may have decided to do, to become a lifelong student. And so you're academics, as far as I'm concerned. And the academy, to me, is a very, very important institution of humanity. Historically, it has a very historic role in humanity's development. The academy is the conscience and the consciousness of humanity. The role of academy, as I see it, and if we look into the history of the academy, is to be kind of a thorn in the side of society, to let the society recognize that some of the tried and tired ways of doing things and the ideologies that are followed and the ways that things are done and things that are being taken for granted are not necessarily the way to go. So academicians, we are here to question all the time and reassess what humanity is doing. It is not to help humanity keep doing what it has been doing, but it is to question it and to recognize the necessities when they are there to change the ways. You will see why I wanted to talk about this when we go to the next point. As you know, the topic that was given to me was developing interesting paper topics and research agenda. But then the question we have to ask is, what is interesting? Does it mean that it is something fun? Does it mean that it is something entertaining? Does it mean that it is something exciting, engrossing? All of these are good. But when I think we think of the historic role of the academy, what we mean, or what I would think of an interesting research agenda, an interesting topic for research, would be something that makes a difference in the lives of human beings, or something that makes a difference in the way that people see how things are, what things are, why they exist, why they do what they do. So either it's something that makes a difference in life, or something that makes a difference in the way people think about life and the universe. So the question is, what is then a good way to find such interesting topics? And as I said earlier, there's not necessarily one way, but I'm going to talk about, from my own experience, what I have found looking at the colleagues that I have had and looking at the history of the academy, what I have found to be most probably or successful, potentially successful ways. what is successful? If you ask me, for an academician, what is successful is long after one is dead and gone, if humanity remembers the contributions that you have made, if humanity still looks at the kinds of contributions that you have made, that, I think, for an academic, success. It's not making money, it's not having the best position as you are living, but it is the legacy that you leave behind. I think that when you think about the historic role of the academy, I think that is maybe the best way to define a success for an academician. What is most needed to be successful? I think the first and foremost, one has to have a voracious appetite for reading. Now, why reading? It is, of course, the condition of the contemporary world. There are many, many other media today, but although all those other media, like the internet, the television, the radio, and the smartphones, etc., can provide for you, inspiration. They may provide for you some ideas, and they may help you fill in the details. But given the circumstances of today, how that media, those other media, are being used, other than books and journals, and I'm of course talking about scholarly journals, they cannot provide for you depth of understanding. They cannot provide for you today depth of knowledge or insight. Maybe in the future, when we as humanity learn how to use those media also in more insightful, deep ways, they may become also very significant in developing scholarly ideas, but at this point in time, that is not yet the case. In order to gain any kind of theoretical, conceptual depth, you have to be voracious readers. I would suggest that in your very first year as a doctoral student, outside of the readings that have been assigned to you by your professors for the seminars that you're taking and so on, I would say that you must have read, by the end of the year, at least 50 books that you have yourself chosen because you find it to be interesting. Things that you want to read about, to enlarge and engage your intellectual powers. You must develop this love of reading and voraciously. I want to give an example. There's a colleague of mine who was also my classmate as I was doing my Ph.D. His name is Richard Pagozzi. He's a very well-renowned marketing professor, but also highly recognized in psychology. And we invited him a few times, and the last time that he visited us, he was talking about his developing interest in neuroscience and neuromarketing. And he told us the story of how he developed this interest and how he was going about doing his research in these areas and his writing. And he told us that he realized that the colleague that he was working with in this topic had a certain kind of autism. And autism was connected to the ways that the brains work. So he said, I had to go and find out the very first ever scholarly book that was written on autism. And he searched and he found that there was this book written almost 2 centuries ago. And that's how he began. He began reading with that very first book ever written about autism. I think it's a good example of how scholarship needs to be done. We have to have a deep knowledge. And to have that, we have to always be ready to go to the originals. For example, and this is necessary when we, for example, are looking at certain theories developed by people, maybe quite some time ago, maybe centuries ago. We tend to go to the secondary sources or tertiary sources. People who have read and written about this scholar and the theory development, but it is never enough. We are bound to end up with naive knowledge rather than deep knowledge about this. There are very good examples of this. Now, you must all know Adam Smith, right? Have you read The Wealth of Nations, written by Adam Smith? There is so much misperception about Adam Smith. Adam Smith is used as a name to justify certain things like laissez-faire, laissez-passer. He is justified with this term called invisible hand. Invisible hand, I'm sorry, not indivisible, but invisible hand. Do you know how many times he uses that term in The Wealth of Nations? Do you know how neoclassical economists have interpreted this invisible hand? When we think of the invisible hand, we think of this is the power of the market. The market is so good at having or having an invisible hand that sees things so that things come out in the end according to the most efficient allocation of resources. That's how invisible hand has been interpreted by the neoclassical economists that others have used. But Adam Smith, in fact, uses this term only once in The Wealth of Nations. And do you know how he uses it? He talks about the danger to the British economy when there is international trade, that people may, that Britain may lose certain economic capabilities because others can produce things more cheaply, and therefore British economy will lose. And he says, but British industrialists, having a certain degree of nationalism, will care about, and as also the English consumers will care about things that have been produced in Great Britain. And so therefore, as if by in an invisible hand, the British economy will keep, successful. That's how he uses it. And how do we think about the invisible hand today, thanks to the economists that have just looked at the secondary and tertiary material? We think of it in a very different way. And this is why it's so important. Another thing is about this laissez-faire, for example. Many people think of Adam Smith and they say, well, Adam Smith, he told us that there should be all kinds of specialization and we should let the market do its thing. But if you read The Wealth of Nations, many times Adam Smith talks about the necessity of moral regulation of the market, because otherwise the market will do things that will not be good for humanity. So please, read voraciously and go to the original theoreticians and original works when you're going to work with a specific theory. Next is you have to have a passionate desire to make a difference. If you want to develop a ongoing and impactful research agenda, I think you should think about making a difference. Not just something, oh, this is interesting, let's look at this. Well, why is it interesting? If we understood this issue, if we studied this question, how would this make a difference in human lives? I think we have to ask that. To be able to do this, there is a necessity of theoretical and conceptual rigor. Method and technique are very significant. And lately I see, for example, in our field, a lot of attention going to techniques and methods. But these cannot, methods and techniques, as much as important as they are and as well executed as they should be, they cannot substitute theory or conceptual content. Therefore, we must pay a lot of attention to concepts and conceptual content. There are, lately, because as you will see through the program, many people see this as a time of crisis, not only in politics, not only in the social circumstances that we are encountering today in the world, but in terms of also intellectual understanding and sciences. As a result, a lot of people are beginning to see that in the sciences, in the disciplines, we have been incrementalists. We look for a gap. What's the gap here? Let me try to fill that in, without thinking about why is that gap necessary to fill in. Rather, more and more people that are beginning to have impact in today's world, I think, are raising questions of how we can question the assumptions that are being made, and the assumptions on the basis of which we have been doing our scientific or scholarly work. The idea is to get outside of the normal way of thinking. How can we think outside the normal is one way maybe to develop that. So then the next thing is, how do we ask a question that leads to perspectival change? If we want to develop, and I think it's very significant and very important to begin to develop this research stream, this research program that you will have for the rest of your academic career during your doctoral program. Here's the reason. During your doctoral program, all you have, all your time is for thinking, developing intellectually, coming up with questions, and so on. When you then become professors, you have to think about teaching, you have to think about committee work, you have to think about service. But right now, during these 4 years or so that you will be in this program, your whole energy is directed and focused on research, on scholarship. And it might be a very good time, therefore, to develop a question that will not be just for one research project, but that will be a programmatic project, which mean that you will keep doing this kind of research, and through that kind of focus, you will begin to develop a field for yourself that when people later on want to understand an issue, they will say, oh, if you need to think about this issue, look at so-and-so's work. That is the kind of, I think, programmatic research that you might want to try and develop at this point in time. I will give you an example. It'll be myself. How did I get into this? When I came into my doctoral program, I was thinking I would do something that had to do with distribution channels. When people talked about power in the distribution channels, is it the retailer that's powerful, the manufacturer that's powerful? People didn't think about the consumers as part of the channel. And so my original question was, well, how can consumers become powerful in the distribution channel? But then, I did what I suggested that you should do. I found this bookstore that was wonderful. It was called Great Expectations. And it was just the greatest bookstore I can ever think of. So I would go there and I would read a lot of books, either there, and then I would buy some too. Reading those kinds of things, I realized that our discipline at that time was very much involved in micro consumer decision making. So at that time, for example, somebody called Frank Bass had come up with a discriminant analysis that discriminated between those people who chose Ford's brand, automobiles, and Chevrolet. And so this was the kind of research that was going. Why do some people buy RCA televisions and others buy Panasonic? Why do some people buy this brand of detergent and the others this kind of detergent? But I was reading a lot of sociology and anthropology and philosophy, and I said, well, this is interesting. So we're looking at all these differences. But what about the fact that when I look into the experience of consumption in the United States at that point in time, and then when I went back to visit Europe, also I realized this. How come I said, everybody wants to have a car. Everybody wants to have a television. At that point, maybe 2 televisions in their homes. How come we are not asking that question? And so that was the question that got me on my way. It was a question that nobody else was asking. It was going against the assumptions of the day. And I think that it has provided me with an exciting life. I find that academics, scholarship, is not my job, it's my life. I love it. I do it because it is what my life is about. And it was this kind of an excitement and this kind of a willingness to think outside the normal, outside what seemed to be the thing to do, the way to publish, the way to become successful, the way that success is usually defined in our society at this point in time. But as I said, my definition of success for an academician is quite different. So what this all means then is find your way and trust in your way. There will be people who will tell you that your way is not going to be bringing you success. You should listen to other people. You should hear what they say, you should judge what they say, but in the end, you must make your decision yourself as to who you are and what it is that you want to be and what kind of an academic you want to be. A 9-to-5 job academic or an academic that lives this life because there's something you want to passionately do for humanity. And not just for humanity, but the whole universe. You know, there are some people who think maybe the worst thing for the universe is that the human beings exist, because we seem to, you know, pollute and hurt the universe more than we kind of help it.